In 146 BC, two cities at opposite ends of the Mediterranean were wiped off the map. In the very same year, Carthage, once Rome's deadliest rival, was burned after a brutal 3-year siege. Corinth, one of the wealthiest and proudest cities in Greece, was stormed and stripped to its foundations. Tens of thousands were killed or enslaved, and two civilizations that had shaped the ancient world were erased almost overnight. On paper, it looks like a coincidence, but when you step back, the pattern is hard to miss. Welcome to Heroic History, the channel where we bring you the decisive moments that shaped empires. If you're new here, hit subscribe so you don't miss more epic stories like this one. Because what happened in 146 BC wasn't just about two cities falling. It was the year Rome declared itself the undisputed master of the ancient world. Let's dig in. Carthage had already fought two massive wars against Rome before 146 BC. The First Punic War from 264 to 241 BC was about control of Sicily and the Western Mediterranean. Rome eventually won, but at great cost. Then came the Second Punic War from 218 to 201 BC, where Hannibal nearly brought Rome to its knees. The climax was the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, where Scipio Africanus defeated Hannibal and forced Carthage into a peace treaty. On paper, that treaty should have ended Carthage as a major power. They had to give up their overseas empire, reduce their navy to just 10 warships, and pay Rome 200 talents of silver every year for 50 years, a staggering sum. To give you perspective, one silver talent was around 26 kilos. So, we're talking about 5,200 kilos of silver annually, year after year. That's the weight of nearly 10 grand pianos in solid silver shipped to Rome every year. But here's the key point. Carthage was still sitting on an incredibly fertile region. The land around Carthage, modern Tunisia, was some of the richest farmland in the Mediterranean. Ancient writers noted that a single harvest there could feed hundreds of thousands. Carthage was exporting olive oil, grain, and textiles on a massive scale. Archaeologists have found Punic amphorae storage jars for goods from Spain to Egypt, showing that Carthaginian trade networks bounced back quickly even after the Second Punic War. By around 150 BC, Carthage had finished paying off its war indemnity early in less than 50 years. That tells us just how strong its economy was. Polybius, the Greek historian who actually lived in Rome as a hostage, noted that Carthage had regained prosperity to a level that made Roman senators nervous. They saw Carthage not just as a beaten rival, but as a rival that could rise again. This anxiety explains the Roman statesman Cato the Elder, who ended every speech in the Senate, no matter the topic, with the words, "Carthago delenda est." Carthage must be destroyed. He died in 149 BC, just before the war actually started, but his warning had already sunk deep into the Roman political mindset. Another factor was geopolitics. Carthage's neighbor Numidia was ruled by King Massinissa, an ally of Rome. He constantly provoked Carthage with border raids, knowing Carthage couldn't legally fight back without Roman approval. When Carthage finally armed itself to defend against Numidia, Rome claimed this violated the treaty and used it as an excuse for war. In reality, Rome had been waiting for a chance to erase Carthage once and for all. So while Carthage wasn't a military threat in 149 BC, they didn't even have a navy anymore. They were still an economic powerhouse and a psychological scar for Rome. Hannibal's memory was too fresh. Rome didn't just want Carthage contained. It wanted the city erased, its people enslaved, its trade networks cut off forever. On the other side of the Mediterranean in Greece, another story was unfolding. Corinth was not just another Greek city. It was one of the richest and most strategically placed cities in the ancient world. Geographically, Corinth sat on the Isthmus of Corinth, the narrow strip of land that connected mainland Greece to the Peloponnese. That meant it controlled land routes in both directions and also benefited from two harbors, Lechaeum on the Corinthian Gulf and Century on the Saronic Gulf. In simple terms, Corinth was sitting at a crossroads of trade. Ships from Italy, Asia Minor, and Egypt all passed through its waters. Merchants could even drag ships across the isthmus using a paved trackway called the Diolkos to save days of dangerous sailing around the Peloponnese. That gave Corinth an economic advantage few cities could rival. Culturally, Corinth was famous for its luxury and artistry. The phrase Corinthian bronze referred to fine metalwork prized across the Mediterranean. The city also had a reputation sometimes criticized by ancient writers for its wealth, decadence, and even immorality. Strabo, the geographer, mentioned the city's thousands of courtesans, making it a symbol of excess in Greek imagination. Then one question immediately comes up. Why Corinth? Athens was the intellectual jewel of Greece. Sparta had a reputation for military toughness, yet it was Corinth that Rome burned to the ground, its men slaughtered, its women and children sold into slavery, and its name wiped off the map. Athens was culturally too valuable. The Romans admired Athens, sent their sons there to study, and used its reputation as a kind of soft power tool. Destroying Athens would have been like burning down the world's university. Sparta, meanwhile, was a shadow of its former self. Its glory days of hoplite warfare were long gone, and it no longer had the numbers or resources to lead Greece into any meaningful conflict. So, if Rome wanted to silence Greek resistance once and for all, Corinth was the obvious target. But what really made Corinth dangerous to Rome was politics. In 146 BC, Corinth was the leading city of the Achaean League, a confederation of Greek city-states that had grown increasingly hostile to Roman interference. While Athens, Sparta, and other cities had their ups and downs, Corinth was the backbone of this resistance and the symbol Rome could not afford to ignore. By the mid-2nd century BC, Rome had the manpower, the supply lines, and the political will to fight on multiple fronts at once. First, manpower. Thanks to its network of Italian allies, Rome could draw not only on Roman citizens, but on a vast pool of recruits. Polybius, writing in the 2nd century BC, estimated that Rome could call up nearly 3/4 of a million infantry and tens of thousands of cavalry when mobilized at full strength. To put that into perspective, even after catastrophic defeats like Cannae, Rome raised new legions within a year. By 146 BC, that system was still in place, meaning destroying Carthage didn't require stripping forces away from Greece or vice versa. Few states in the ancient world could absorb losses and still field fresh armies the way Rome could. Second, organization and supply. By this point, Rome's armies ran on the manipular system, which was flexible enough to split into multiple effective armies. And Rome had learned hard lessons in logistics during the wars with Hannibal. They had the ships, the roads, and the tax revenues to keep distant campaigns running without collapse. Second, organization and supply. By this time, Rome's manipula gave its armies flexibility. They could be divided into multiple effective forces rather than a single unwieldy phalanx. The wars against Hannibal had also taught Rome the importance of logistics. By the mid-2nd century, Rome had a network of roads in Italy, reliable tax revenues from its provinces, and supply systems that could move grain, weapons, and reinforcements across long distances. Campaigns didn't collapse because an army ran out of food, a common problem for earlier states. Third, the navy. After 3 Punic Wars, Rome had mastered shipbuilding and seamanship. Its fleet could move soldiers and supplies across the Mediterranean faster and more securely than most rivals. That mattered in 146 BC, when armies had to be supported simultaneously in North Africa and Greece. Carthage and Corinth weren't next door to each other. They were separated by a sea. Rome's ability to command that sea was what made double campaigning realistic. Fourth, the provincial system. By this point, Rome wasn't fighting from Italy alone. Provinces in Spain, Macedonia, and Sicily provided steady revenues and staging grounds for further operations. Taxes collected in one theater could fund armies in another. Garrisons in Spain or Macedonia reduced the need to send fresh troops from Italy each time. This web of provinces gave Rome strategic depth no Greek league or Punic remnant could match. Finally, politics and culture. Roman senators competed fiercely for gloria, military glory that advanced their careers. That meant there was never a shortage of ambitious commanders ready to lead campaigns. The Senate itself, as a collective body, had developed mechanisms for financing wars, assigning provinces, and balancing multiple commanders at once. Where other states might have stalled for lack of leadership or political will, Rome had a system that rewarded aggression. So in 149 BC, Rome sent an army to North Africa. What they expected to be a quick campaign turned into a brutal 3-year siege. Carthage was not helpless. The city had rebuilt walls, reorganized defenses, and even managed to put together a fleet again despite restrictions. Citizens armed themselves, forged weapons, and mounted a fierce resistance. The first Roman commanders struggled, supplies were cut, morale wavered, and the Carthaginians even scored local victories. But in 147 BC, Rome appointed Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus. Young but determined, Scipio brought strict discipline back to the legions, reorganized supply lines, and turned the siege into a systematic campaign. One of his most decisive moves was building a giant mole or causeway across the harbor mouth. Carthage relied on the sea to bring in supplies and reinforcements. By blocking the port, Scipio trapped the city. Carthage tried to fight back, even constructing a secret new harbor channel and launching ships in a surprise sortie. But Scipio's navy and siege works held firm. Rome's use of engineering was critical. Siege towers, catapults, battering rams, and constant trenching slowly ground down Carthage's defenses. The manipular system allowed legions to split into effective detachments, maintaining pressure at multiple points. Rome's logistical lessons from the Hannibalic War paid off. They had the grain, the roads, and the tax revenues to keep the siege going year after year. By the spring of 146 BC, starvation had set in. Ancient sources described scenes of famine and desperation inside Carthage. When Scipio finally ordered the assault, the fighting turned into one of the most infamous urban battles of antiquity. Roman troops had to clear the city block by block, dragging defenders from rooftops and alleys. Polybius, who was present, wrote about the horror of the slaughter. When it was over, the destruction was total. Tens of thousands of survivors were sold into slavery. Ancient accounts differ on the numbers, but the scale was staggering. Some speak of 50,000 captives, others higher. The city itself was burned. Later, Roman writers even claimed the ground was cursed, though the famous story about salting the earth is a later invention. The symbolism was clear enough without it. The sack of Carthage wasn't just a conquest, it was meant as humiliation. Carthage, once mistress of the seas, was erased from the map. Its treasures were looted, its walls torn down, its people dispersed. Rome annexed the surrounding lands into the new province of Africa, which soon became one of the Republic's breadbaskets, shipping grain to Italy. Economically, Rome had killed a competitor and gained a new supply line. Psychologically, Rome had erased the ghost of Hannibal once and for all. Modern historians debate the language we should use. Some call it herbicide, the killing of a city. Others, like Ben Kiernan, even suggest it bears resemblance to genocide, since the goal was not just victory, but obliteration of a culture. What is certain is that Rome wanted Carthage remembered only as a warning. The fall of Carthage shows us something about Roman strategy. They didn't just want to win battles, they wanted to remove rivals from history itself. A city that had terrified Rome for decades was not merely defeated, it was humiliated, depopulated, and erased. The Romans didn't want their grandchildren to ever fear another Hannibal, and so they made sure there would never again be a Carthage. While Rome's legions were tearing down the walls of Carthage, another army was already moving in Corinth. Carthage tested Rome's strength, but Greece would test Rome's pride. Rome did indeed respect Greece, but not out of fear of being defeated in battle. By 146 BC, Rome had 2 legions ready in the area, backed by thousands of Italian allies. They could call on more than 20,000 infantry and about 3,500 cavalry, enough to overwhelm any Greek force. But the Romans did remember history. They remembered how a united Macedon had once threatened their dominance, and they knew that Greek leagues and confederacies had a habit of stirring up trouble. The issue was not immediate danger, but political control. By striking at Corinth, Rome wasn't acting out of fear, but sending a calculated message. No matter how glorious your past, no matter how sophisticated your culture, resistance would be crushed. Tensions built when Roman envoys tried to mediate disputes between the Achaean League and Sparta. The talks collapsed, and Achaean leaders like Critolaus and Diaeus rallied the league against Roman interference. In 147 BC, Critolaus raised an army, but at the Battle of Scarpheia, he was decisively beaten by Quintus Caecilius Metellus Macedonicus. That left Diaeus to take command. Instead of folding, he pulled together another army and fortified the isthmus near Corinth, hoping to block the Roman advance. The decisive battle came at Leucopetra, close to Corinth itself. Ancient sources and modern reconstructions suggest that Diaeus mustered around 14,000 infantry and 600 cavalry. On the other side, Lucius Mummius, the Roman consul sent to finish the job, had about 23,000 infantry and 3,500 cavalry, a force nearly twice as strong, supported by allies and experienced legionaries. At first, the Achaean cavalry engaged, but they quickly lost their nerve and retreated, leaving the infantry exposed. Mummius sent a picked force of about 1,000 men to strike at the enemy flank. That broke the Greek lines. Panic spread. Diaeus fled the battlefield and later committed suicide, and the rest of the army scattered. Corinth was left defenseless. What followed was brutal even by ancient standards. Mummius hesitated for a couple of days, worried about possible ambushes, but then ordered his men into the city. Every adult male was killed. Women and children were rounded up and sold into slavery. Ancient accounts describe the city's immense wealth, artwork, statues, treasures being looted and shipped to Rome. Polybius, writing later, emphasized how total the destruction was. The temples were stripped, the city burned, and for over a century the site remained desolate. The symbolism mattered as much as the slaughter. By destroying Corinth so completely, Rome wasn't just winning a war, it was erasing a symbol. This was the city that had led the Achaean League into confrontation. This was the city that had dared to act as though Greek independence still meant something. Rome made sure there would be nothing left to inspire others. For Greece, the fall of Corinth was more than the end of a city. It marked the end of political independence. The Achaean League was dissolved. Greece was reorganized under Roman provincial control, eventually folded into the province of Macedonia. Athens would remain a place of learning, Sparta, a tourist curiosity, but Corinth became a smoking ruin, proof of what happened to anyone who resisted Rome's order. Rome's destruction of Corinth was psychological warfare. It was a theater staged for the benefit of the entire Greek world. The message was simple. Your history won't protect you, your culture won't save you, and your independence won't last. That message stuck. From then on, no Greek city dared rise in serious revolt. In that sense, Corinth's ashes became one of the foundations of Rome's empire. By 146 BC, the Mediterranean truly belonged to Rome. The destruction of Carthage and Corinth sent a double message to the entire Mediterranean world. No rival, economic or cultural, could stand against Rome. By destroying Carthage and Corinth in the same year, Rome sent two different but connected messages. To the west, no economic rival could recover and challenge Rome's supremacy. To the east, no cultural or political independence, no matter how glorious, could shield a Greek city from Roman retribution. This was humiliation on both fronts. So was this all deliberate? Did the Roman Senate sit down and say, let's erase two enemies at once? Probably not. Ancient sources like Polybius and Appian don't give us any evidence of a master plan. Each war had its own spark. Rome declared war on Carthage after the Numidian king Massinissa, Rome's ally, pressured Carthage into violating the peace treaty. Corinth fell after the Achaean League miscalculated and openly defied Rome's demands. But when we step back, historians see something bigger. Rome was acting not just as a regional power, but as the architect of a new order. Polybius himself argued that 146 BC marked the moment Rome became the undisputed hegemon of the Mediterranean. Later scholars have echoed that point. This was the end of a multipolar world, where Carthage, Macedon, the Seleucids, and Greek leagues balanced each other. After 146 BC, there was only one pole, Rome. The economic results were immediate. With Carthage destroyed, Rome controlled the western Mediterranean's trade routes. Sicily, Sardinia, and now Africa became Roman provinces, sending grain to feed Italy's growing population. Corinth's fall opened the eastern Mediterranean. Rome didn't annex all of Greece right away, but it dismantled any real independence. Trade shifted toward Rome's orbit, and cities that once looked to Corinth for leadership now looked to Roman governors. Culturally, there's a fascinating paradox. Rome destroyed Corinth physically. Livy and later writers tell us men were killed, women and children sold as slaves, and the city looted. Archaeological evidence shows the city lay in ruins for a century until Julius Caesar refounded it. Yet Greek culture wasn't erased. In fact, it flourished inside Rome. The Romans took Greek art, philosophy, and education and made them their own. The message was clear. Greece could inspire, but only under Rome's shadow. The independence was humiliated, but the culture was absorbed. Psychologically, the destruction mattered as much as the material gains. Roman statesmen wanted to ensure that no one ever forgot what happened when you stood against them. Polybius records that after Carthage's fall, the city was set on fire for 17 days. Appian adds the famous, though probably legendary detail that the Romans plowed salt into the ground so nothing could grow there again. Whether or not the salt story is true, the symbolism was unmistakable. Carthage would not rise again. At Corinth, the message was equally brutal. Pausanias, the Greek traveler writing centuries later, still described the site as a field of rubble. The Romans weren't just punishing a rebellion, they were performing a demonstration. Wealth, culture, beauty. None of it mattered if you defied Rome. Different generations of historians have read this year in different ways. For ancient writers like Polybius, who admired Roman discipline even while lamenting Greek losses, it was the moment Rome became the universal empire. For Roman writers like Appian, it was proof of destiny. Rome had done what no one else could. In the 19th century, historians saw 146 BC as part of a broader narrative of imperialism, comparing it to European powers crushing rivals. More recent scholars like Eric Gruen and Adrian Goldsworthy stress the psychological and symbolic value. They even ask if what happened at Carthage should be called urbicide, the killing of a city, or in harsher terms, an early form of genocide. Still, most stop short of claiming Rome carefully planned a year of domination. Instead, they point to a mix of political motives, legal excuses, like Carthage's clash with Numidia, and Rome's growing ability to sustain multiple wars at once. That combination gave Rome the opening, and they took it. However you look at it, by 146 BC, the Mediterranean had shifted from a patchwork of competing powers to a world where Rome stood on top, whether by design or by opportunity seized. Many modern historians call 146 BC a point of no return. Before that, Rome could still be seen as one great power among others. After that, it was the Mediterranean's master. No other city, league, or kingdom could stand as an equal. The term Pax Romana, the Roman peace, would only be coined later under Augustus. But the foundations were laid here. A world with multiple centers of power became a world with one. And that's why 146 BC is remembered not just as two wars, but as a turning point in world history. From then on, the Mediterranean was Rome's world. What do you think? Was Rome securing peace or showing the world a lesson in fear? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button and share it with a fellow history buff. And if you're new here, subscribe so you won't miss the next campaign we uncover. Thanks for sticking around until the end, and I'll see you tomorrow with another great story from the ancient world.